Hello, everybody. How are you? This is Book Talk. We are here with author Jennifer Fraser. Her book, she's a best-selling author and award-winning educator. She also has a PhD in comparative literature, and we just want to understand her and her journey all the way to writing the two books that we're going to be discussing today, which is Teaching Bullies, Teaching Bullies, Zero Tolerance on the Court or in the Classroom, and The Bullied Brain, Heal Your Scars and Restore Your Health. So Jennifer, maybe you can just introduce yourself, just to get to know who you are, where you're based, what your interests are, just to get to know a feel of the kind of person that you are, and maybe you can walk us through the journey all the way to when you wrote these two books.
Thank you, Josephine. Basically, I love reading. I love reading so much that I clued in that if I did a PhD, I could just stay in the library and keep reading while everybody else was working. So that's why I ended up doing that. And then, you know, I taught at University of Toronto for years. I was a lecturer, and I moved with my husband to the other side of Canada, and there wasn't a position at the university, and I started teaching in an independent school. And I learned how much I love teaching. Like, I love young people, and I think they're brilliant and creative and empathic. And I just enjoyed it so much and connected with them so much. I always kept researching, I kept publishing and writing, but I really became connected to the process of teaching. And I think it's really what drives my work right now. So with Teaching Bullies, what happened was I got pulled just accidentally, in a sense, into an abuse situation at this independent school. And I realized that, I mean, it was kind of like a breakthrough insight for me that young people bully because adults role model it. So adults say zero tolerance for bullying, except when I'm doing it. And so seeing that kind of hypocrisy and the broken system that's in place to address adults who are abusive with young people and children, that was the driving force behind Teaching Bullies. And I really I looked at the law, I looked at psychology, I looked at psychiatry. I tried to really unpack what's going on and why is this happening. Because the way I figure things out is by writing and doing research. I don't just listen to, hey, this is the way it is, or this is normal, or this is whatever euphemism they come up with to cover up what's going on. I replace that with research. So with Teaching Bullies, one of the chapters I did in that book was on neuroscience. And it was a huge discovery for me because I didn't know anything about the brain. I think most of us don't. We live in a society where what we can't see, we tend to ignore, and we can't see our brains. So we walk around being obsessed with our bodies while we're ignoring the most important sort of command central that runs our whole lives, simply because we can't see it. So I started to do a deep dive into the neuroscience, and Teaching Bullies went to #1 in the sports psychology category on Amazon. And that's when I thought to myself, people want to know. They want to learn about this. People are tired of bullying. They're tired of abuse. Every single day we open the newspaper, we have to open the newspaper, kind of old fashioned, but you know, we're bombarded with these horrendous stories, and youth mental health is in decline. Bullying is on the rise. Everything that we're doing is not effective. So that's why I wrote The Bullied Brain. I thought, okay, well, nobody else is writing about this. People aren't using the science to this situation exactly. And I was like, how do people heal? How can we repair? What can we do differently once we understand the scientific background as to what's happening?
Okay, that's very fascinating, very fascinating. And I'd like to know, around when was this? when was this, around the time that you got the idea to write Teaching Bullies? When was this? And what are the circumstances within the school that prompted you now? I know you've mentioned that there are certain, there's something that you came across that you saw, or that, I don't know whether you said you mentioned or you saw, or you witnessed, but I want you to give us a bit more of insight around that time, so that now you got the idea for writing Teaching Bullies.
Well, what happened was the parent contacted me and she said, I've heard from my son. He's texting me. He says he can't take it anymore. And so this is a 16-year-old boy. Can't take it anymore. They're calling us, and I'll just use the nicer version of the language, but you can imagine. They're calling us effing, embarrassment, effing pathetic. And then as time went on, I learned more about what it was. I was at this, it's a private school. So at this private school, big international private school, I was asked to take testimonies from these students about what was going on. So I witnessed some things myself, but really what I was doing as a teacher, which is what we were required to do, I was taking testimonies. So the headmaster asked me, I would sit down with the student for about 2 hours. They would just talk. I would not ask them anything except for clarifying questions like, could you give me the details? Or what were the words that were used? Can you describe more the gesture? This type of thing. How did it make you feel? That's the only thing you're allowed to do when you take a testimony. Once the testimony was completed, I typed it up and I sent it back to the student. And I said, you can send this on to the headmaster. It's your choice. This is your document. If there's any changes you need to make, if it's not accurate, if I did something wrong, let me know. But if you want to just have it for yourself for the sake of therapy, it's yours, you control it, or you can send it on. All 8 students, there were 4 boys and 4 girls, all 8 students wanted it sent on to the headmaster. So I sent them all on to the headmaster as he asked me to do. And then he interviewed students. So some of the students were already at university, so they were talking about what had happened to them when they were in high school. And some of them were like grade 10, grade 11, and grade 12. So there was a big range, 5-year range. So when I took these testimonies, the students were describing, in particular, the 4 boys that I took testimonies from were describing what male teachers were doing. And the male teachers were lots of homophobic slurs, lots of swearing, lots of rage, like crazy, like losing it, screaming and yelling, lots of muttering under their breath, kind of like obscenities, like just really crazy stuff. Anyway, and I mean, these are my colleagues. I was working with them. These are teachers. And so the first thing that amazed me was I love how you use that word witness, because what I learned was when someone is very abusive that way, it's hidden. They have a totally different persona when they're interacting with other adults. As soon as the doors close, they transform into another self. And this is very well documented in the research. And we can talk more about that because the research is fascinating on what happens. And these people, they come by it honestly. It's almost guaranteed that someone who behaves that way was once an abuse victim themselves in childhood. And this is why they have this very troubled behavior. They're not bad people. So one of the big things that I want to do in my work is I want to sidestep this moral categories for everybody. It's not a moral issue. If it's about the brain, it's a medical issue. And these people have very damaged brains. It's just that in our society, we enable it. We allow them to behave this way. We cover up for them. We do everything we can to make sure that they're not held accountable and that they don't get better. They don't get rehabilitated. So, I mean, this is really what I work on. So what the key thing though, in answer to your question, for me, what was the line that was crossed where I decided that I had to write about this? I had dedicated years to researching it. I was not going to stop until I made change. And I'm still very much in that mode. I'm listening to the boys, and the boys are talking about a targeted kid. And these men, one would stand and watch, and one would stop what was going on and tell this one boy to come forward. So this one boy, and this happened hundreds of times, this boy would come forward, and the teacher would start yelling in his face, asking all these rhetorical questions. You're the best. You're not even trying. Do you even deserve to be here? What are you doing here? Do you even like this? Like just this kind of lambasting in his face, this berating. And at a certain point, the kid would crack and he would start to try and get away from the yelling in the face. And the teacher would reach out and grab him and hold him in and detain him. So that he had to continue this scene of public humiliation in front of all the other boys. And the boys described it as vicious. So I'm taking my notes, I'm doing my duty. The headmaster asked me. And then I finally said, I was like, who was this kid? Who was this boy? And the student answered, Monty.
So I'm very curious as well. As you're doing your research, what are you talking to people? Are you actually going to the ground and talking to people who have been bullied and people who are also doing the bullying? Or how do you do the research? Or do you go online and get the information that you require? Or do you actually have to go out to the field and talk to the guys that you want to write about?
It's both, really. I do a lot of presentations before COVID. For example, I would go and present to sort of hundreds of people at a time because there's a lot of interest in this. I think there's a lot of people who want to see social change. I mean, this kind of abuse to the brain in all forms, it's kind of the bedrock of our social ills. It leads to health problems. It leads to mental health problems. It leads to substance abuse. It leads to disordered behavior like eating disorders. It leads to aggression. I mean, it's the absolute, like, child abuse is the cornerstone of all the things in society that are pretty tragic. And what's amazing is we can change that because we have neuroplasticity. So when I do research, really what I did was I started to work on the neuroscience. So I looked at neurobiology. I looked at the behavioral side of it, because I'm not a scientist. I could never understand the deep science behind this. But what I did was connect with one of the leading neuroscientists, the most awarded neuroscientists alive today internationally, which is Dr. Michael Merzenich. And Dr. Michael Merzenich confirmed to me, he said there's thousands of deep science articles and research and studies that confirm everything that I talk about in the book. And he said in the Bullied Brain, the Heal Your Scars and Restore Your Health, he said it is scientifically the most thorough treatment of the subject on planet Earth. And so really, you know, it's this, talking to people is one thing, but what I found is most people are operating in a mindset, a normalized bullying and abuse mindset. A lot of people believe, because it's been hammered into us since we were young, they believe that bullying and abuse are necessary evils for greatness. And I spend all my time in the book showing that there's no research that backs that up, but there is an incredible amount of research that backs up how harmful bullying and abuse are to the brain.
Okay, perfect. And so there's something you said about if the teachers have already, or the people that, if the adults have normalized bullying, then kids as well will not think that there's a problem with it. So then how do you break out of that cycle as you've been writing the books? Is there a way that you have come across where you can say, this is one of the ways that we can now, if we have a situation where a teacher is a bully, how do we handle that? And how do kids learn that it's not okay for bullying to take place, even if an adult is doing it? How do you teach that to young people?
That's such an important issue and question. So one of the first things that I think has to happen is we need to get educated about how we've been led to believe something that's false. So I use the analogy, when I was growing up, we were taught and we learned and we saw all around us in culture that smoking was normal, it was healthy, our doctors smoked, our teachers smoked, our parents smoked. So you imagine this child looking at this culture, and then think of the marketing, you know, Hollywood actresses, they all smoked, like Audrey Hepburn. And then there was a lot of advertising around Man was a famous kind of lone ranger cowboy type that we all knew as kids. And he always had a cigarette. He's out on his horse. He's very grit. He's like all about resilience and grit and power. So as children, we just absorbed this culture. And we believed that, oh, okay, we made the association. Smoking gives you glamour. It gives you independence. It makes you tough. Well, over the course of my lifetime, we learned that smoking actually causes cancer. It's connected to cancer. And x-rays could show lungs covered in blackened tumors from smoking. And then our society bombarded us with, look, you have to face the truth. Look at these images. I believe we need to do that now with brain scans. We need to say to children, hey, you need to look at these brain scans. These are children that were neglected. They didn't have parents to care for them and love them and be with them and teach them how to speak and be with them as they learn to walk and introduce them to language and love and care and physicality. And we have those images. Tragically, we have those images from Romania. Children were raised in kind of factory-like orphanages, and it did incredible damage to their brains. They weren't hit, they weren't struck, they just were ignored. And the human brain needs loving parents, loving caretakers, loving grandparents, loving teachers and coaches in order to grow and be architecturally healthy and develop properly. So with kids, what we need to do, and I cover this in the book and I talk about it and I back everything I say in the book with research. First of all, we need to give them a vocabulary in order to accurately speak about what's happening to their brain. So we need to teach them, first of all, to know about their brain, pay attention to their brain, understand how their brain works, and understand what environments are harmful. They need to learn at an early age. It doesn't matter if it's a teacher or a doctor or a coach or any adult in a position of trust and authority. Just because they're an adult and have been on this planet longer than you does not mean they deserve your respect or obedience. Doesn't matter if it's a family member. You need to know that these behaviors, like swearing, homophobic slurs, put downs, berating, public humiliation, gaslighting, like kids need to know that these types of environments are incredibly harmful to their brains. You can't see with the naked eye the harm being done to the brain, but you can know, and you need to know that you have to report it to the right person. And that right person then needs to advocate for you, because at present, the system is very, very broken.
And actually, it's good that you've mentioned all the different kinds, because I wanted to ask you, do you think there's a gap do you think people realize the kinds of forms bullying might take, or the kinds of forms abuse might take? Do you think people don't fully realize, like if somebody does this, I can consider that abuse, I can consider that bullying? Do you think enough people understand what it actually is, enough for them to now take the step and report it or do something about it when it happens?
No, I don't think they know at all. And what's really interesting in the research is they can show that corporations, for example, or organizations, if they don't tolerate microaggressions. So a microaggression might be you make a joke about women, for example. So the misogynistic, you make a misogynistic joke, or you make a joke about someone from a different culture, or someone who speaks differently or looks differently or has a disability. That's a microaggression, and it's meant to normalize abusive types of behavior so that the people that hear it are sort of like, they're unsure. They're like, there's kind of a meanness to that. At the same time, it's meant to be funny. I want to belong to the group. Everybody else is laughing. I guess it's okay. Well, the research shows that if you do not tolerate that in a school, you do not tolerate that in an organization or in a sport club or Boy Scouts or whatever, you call it out. You go, hey, that's hurtful. You shouldn't, I don't like that. Don't, I'm going to take the risk of being in the out group because I don't like that. And I don't think you should put people down and cover it up as a joke. Same thing with, and this is something that I used to do, I'm sorry to say, I used to think it was funny to roll my eyes, if I was teaching or be a bit sarcastic and, I'd get a laugh from the kids. Well, I've learned in the research that can actually be really hurtful to someone on the receiving end of it. It can make them feel not heard. It can make them feel laughed at. It's not okay. So, all of us, the more we learn about these types of microaggressions, the more we create an atmosphere where much larger aggressions like a homophobic slur or swearing or yelling in someone's face is not going to be tolerated. It looks like there's a note from someone. I can read, great stuff, Jennifer. Keep up the good work. You touch on so many truths. That's a lovely comment. Thank you. I feel that this material resonates in really powerful ways, and all of us can benefit from having better care for our brains. And another really great analogy for this that I think people really can understand is we used to think concussions were sort of a moral event. You know, in sports, they'd say, you know, if you got your bell rung, you got to get back out there for your team. You got to show your coach and the audience that you're tough as nails. You get out there and show, you know, your grit. Well, we now know that a concussion is a traumatic brain injury, and the worst thing you can do is return to play, because you could do such damage to your brain, and you could even jeopardize your life by doing that. So we understand concussions now as a medical issue, and we address the injury to the brain. Even though we can't see it, we address it as something that we have to give very specialized care to. It's the same thing with the bullied brain. If you have a bullied brain, and most of us don't go through life without having some kind of emotional or physical or sexual blow to the brain, we've been abused in some way. It's very rare not to have. And on the flip side too, we might have been the aggressor. We might have grown up in a childhood where the only way we could survive is to become identified with the aggressor. That's a natural human brain response to abuse. And we've gone out into our life and we've become a bullying individual. Both of those things do extreme damage to the brain, and we can fix them. The beautiful thing is our brains are wired for change. They are able to, through practice, through hard work, just like physical fitness, brain fitness can be achieved. There's evidence-based ways. It's what I talk about in the Bullied Brain, all the different ways in which we can recover. But sorry, Josephine, to go back to your question, I don't think people understand at all, and I don't even think our laws reflect how much emotional abuse does damage to the brain. Emotional neglect and emotional abuse do as much, if not more, damage to the brain than sexual and physical. Sexual and physical show up on the body. They hurt the body, but the body heals. And we also bring in medical experts when the body's being hurt. And it's easier to report those sorts of things. But when you're in an emotional abuse situation, it's difficult to articulate, it's difficult to identify, and it does really serious damage. Okay, I'll look at some of the comments here. In your book, The Bullied Brain, you give your chapters as steps. Why so? Basically, what I'm telling you are the steps that I undertook personally based on research to heal my own brain. So I'm sharing with you, and it's going to be different for everyone. It's not like it's a prescription or something, but I'm sharing with you extensive research that I drew upon to get my brain healthy, because I'm an abuse survivor.
Sorry about that. So I want to ask you a question. Writing the book, has it helped you overcome some of the own trauma that you went through? Has it helped you do that?
Oh, absolutely. I would highly recommend. I mean, well, that's not true. I was going to say I would recommend for everyone that writing is an amazing therapy for this kind of trauma. But that's not really true. I think what we all have to do is we choose our own passionate way to heal. So to explain what I mean, when you're an abuse survivor, when you've been through abuse or extreme bullying would be the same, your brain gets very, very good. And you can see it on a brain scan. You're a part of your brain called the amygdala. It does many things, but just to make it more clear in the moment, it can be referred to as the threat response or the alarm bell of your brain. So when you've been abused, your amygdala gets enlarged. And it gets a lot of fuel and a lot of energy from your brain, because your brain is all about survival. So if you've been abused, it gets trained to think that more is coming, and it's predicting more trouble, and it's worried about more trouble, and it's constantly looking everywhere, and it interprets people. Someone might say something just very relaxed, very nice, whatever, but your brain hears it as a risk. It's called hypervigilance. So imagine all that energy going into hypervigilance in your brain doesn't leave a lot of room for your passions. So your passion might be dance. My passion is writing and reading. Your passion might be being out in nature and hiking, or being with your friends, or singing. It could be anything. And really, the more you go very purposefully, I think, to that healing place of what you love to do, you're taking the energy away from the hypervigilant brain. You're saying to the brain, you know what? We've got this. We're safe. You don't need to worry. I'm in charge now. This is the mind talking to the brain, and the body can talk to the brain too. But when I'm writing, I say to my brain, you know what? Relax. I'm writing. I'm happy. I'm safe. You can go offline. You can give me lots of energy for creativity and problem solving and explaining and teaching, because that's really what I want to do right now. And there's nothing, no danger.
Mm-hmm.
And my brain goes, oh, great. Thank goodness she's in charge for once.
That's really interesting. So everybody has their own way of dealing with trauma and just anything that's hurting them. Everybody has their own way. And so I wanted to ask you there, who are you targeting with the book? Who do you want to read this book? Who is your target audience?
The book is written for anyone who's ever been abused or bullied, which is the majority of us. It is written for parents who really want to understand the risks that their children might be exposed to. In a world where we've normalized bullying, they can go into a sport program and be at risk. They can go into a church and be at risk. They can go into Boy Scouts and be at risk. I could go on and on and on. The abuse and the way in which it's enabled and covered up in organizations and schools and clubs is shocking. It's just shocking. And it doesn't have to be that way. So people who are systems thinkers, I really try to tackle the system. At the same time as the book is written for the general reader. It's not academic and hard to read and difficult. It's very practical. It's about, here's what you can do. Step 1. Here's what you can do. Step 2. Here's the research. Here's why I came to figure this out. Here's what we can do. Because really what I want to do is start a revolution. I think it is time, and I argue in the book, we've been raised in a bullying and abuse framework. We've been steeped in it. We've normalized it. I mean, you look at our young people, even on TikTok, the ways in which they are so full of two things. On the one hand, you see the most incredible creativity and hilarity and beauty. And then on the flip side, you see so much there's just a real bullying element that it just makes me so sad. I mean, we need to learn to have empathy, and empathy is our superpower. And just to clarify what I mean by empathy is it's different than sympathy. Sympathy is when you feel sorry for someone. It's like, oh, that's so sad that happened to you. I feel really sorry for you. That's not empathy. Empathy we are born with. When a baby is born, it has a brain wired for empathy. Empathy is when you look at people out in the world and you can choose whatever situation you want, something from the news, let's say, and instead of looking at these people and laughing at them and condemning them and saying they're this, that, or the other in a really bullying and negative and abusive way, you take a step back and say, I'm going to walk in that person's shoes. I'm going to look through the world through their eyes. I'm going to feel what they're feeling. I'm going to try and understand how they think and how they got there. That's empathy. And empathy is our superpower. And it's one of the most sought after qualities in careers. If you look for career descriptions, you won't find one that says, we'd really like to hire someone who's abusive. We're looking for someone who's going to bully their colleagues and do a lot of underhanded manipulative behaviors and gaslight people and make people feel lousy about themselves. You're not going to ever see that in a job description. What you are going to see is we're looking for people with empathy, because empathy allows you to hold two things in your head at once or more. It allows you to say, this is how I feel. I feel like this. I think this. This is how I see the world. These are my beliefs. This is my political attitude. And you know what? I can see someone else's and I can see that it's different. And I can try and understand that and look at it and imagine how they got there and then have a dialogue with them, a diplomatic, caring, empathic dialogue. I don't need to put them down. I need to find out more. And that critical thinking, that ability to hold two different ideas at once, that is an incredible gift. And the reason why the human brain has it is it's because of how babies and children survive. They're born into the world needing to know what the powerful adults are thinking, and they're reading gestures and facial tone of voice right from the get-go. They need to know what they're thinking, how they're feeling, these powerful adults, and what they intend to do. When you get really adept at that, you get to be someone who's so incredibly aware and sophisticated and complex in your thinking, and someone who's able to socially connect with others in a powerful way. That's why it's such a sought after quality. Somebody's asking, step 7 in the Bullied Brain talks about believing in yourself. Can you expound more on that? Yes. That was really where I started to look at my own abuse situation as a child. I was abused by teenagers in high school. There was a lot of us, a lot of victims. The program went on for 10 years. It was an outdoor education program, and they used it to physically, emotionally, and sexually abuse students. There were 3 teachers, pedophiles, and they worked together. So for most of my life, I took that experience. I never told my parents. I saw psychologists, I saw psychiatrists at University of Toronto because I had an eating disorder. And I never told any of them that I had been sexually and physically and emotionally abused by these teachers. I kept it separate. It was a box over here and had nothing to do with me. So this is called, in the literature and the research, this is called disassociation, as I'm sure you guys know. So I put it over here. It wasn't me. I was a very successful person. I was doing my academic work. I was teaching. I was winning awards. I was doing really well. And then there was this situation that had happened in the past that had nothing to do with me, except that it did, because it caused all kinds of mental health issues for me, like an eating disorder. So when I was writing The Bullied Brain, I finally, due to a series of other circumstances, had to unpack this situation, and I integrated this dissociated self. And believing in myself meant that I could have self-compassion for that teenage girl. I could honor her. I could bring her in. And the more I did that, the more I cared about her, the more I listened to her, the more I allowed her to be part of me and nothing to be ashamed of and nothing to feel frightened by or wounded by or panicked by. And I started to have a lot of reactions as I did this. I don't want to make it sound like it was easy. I started to have panic attacks, for example, where I couldn't breathe. And, this went on for months. Anyways, I did integrate her. And the more I brought that dissociated self into me, that childhood self that was so incredibly afraid and hurt and weak and panicked, the more I started to believe in myself and separate out from the aggressors. So the aggressors were the abusive teachers. And I've learned over doing all this research that you associate with you identify, you associate with, and you protect the aggressor, because that's how you survived it in childhood. In childhood, it's easier to identify with the aggressor and dissociate and just allow the abuse to happen because you're a child. You can't speak up. You don't have the language. You don't know how to tell your parents. You don't even know it's abuse when it's happening, because we don't teach our kids to understand exactly what abuse is, what it looks like, what grooming is, what child luring is. We don't teach kids, so they don't know. We hand them over to abusive individuals on a silver platter, and we're still doing it today. And I'm, a middle-aged woman. My childhood, there's no difference in what's happening today with kids. And that's so disturbing to me, and this is what I want to see change. Josephine, can you hear me? I can't hear you. I can't hear you. Oh my gosh, we lost her again. Okay, let me see if there's any more questions. Anthony.
Hello there. Let me come up to step in on what has been going on. We've been having some technical problems. I'm the producer of Book Talk, and I'm glad that you've been here with us. I appreciate everything that you've been sharing, and about this beautiful book of yours, dealing with bullying, something that has been a very important topic in our schools today. Yes. At this point, I will ask you to share, where can someone get your book?
You can go to my website. It's www.bulliedbrain.com. And there's a page there that's by the book, and it tells you all the different, it's at Amazon, it's on Chapters Indigo, it's on all kinds of different book sites, but that's a fast way. If you go on Amazon, The great thing for me is, not that I want to support exactly one particular store, but it's great to get reviews. So if you do like the book, I would love you to just speak up, because that's the way we can get this information out, especially to children.
Oh yeah, that's to everyone out there who's listening or watching. Go ahead and get the book, The Bullied Brain, The Bullied Brain. Yeah, by Jennifer. And before you go, because you're gonna end this episode right now, we always ask the author to share with us a few words that we can always remember. And which are yours?
My words that I want everyone to remember are: hurt brains hurt. If you have a brain that's been hurt, you feel pain. And if you have a brain that's been hurt, you might hurt other people. And it's a medical issue. It's a brain injury, and we can heal it. Our brains are incredibly adept at healing.
So hurt brains hurt. Now, if you've been hurt by someone out there, remember that it could be coming from some brain hurt that they've experienced. So I pray that you understand and you'll be able to handle that. But for you to be able to do, go and get the book by Jennifer, The Bullied Brain, and read and understand. And also share it with other people. Let the people know. Let the people have the information, because information is important. Most of the things that we experience, whether they are good or whether they are bad, depends on the information that we have about that topic. So don't lose this chance to read about The Bullied Brain. Go get it. So once again, this is your producer, Anthony Murore, and we have Jennifer. And I don't know whether Josephine is able to speak right now. Can you speak? No, we can't hear you. Never mind. So we've been having Josephine as our host, and we appreciate you very much. It's been an honor to have all of you listening or watching. We thank you. And most of all, we thank Jennifer for taking your time and sharing with us this important message. Thank you very much, Jennifer.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Have a good time. Yeah. Bye.